Our next storyteller coming up to the stage is Ash. She is an Aussie expat who came to the US with big dreams, but stayed for the plot twist. Tonight, she's taking the stage for the second time around. Please welcome Ash.
Hello. The first time around, I left Australia to build a life. That sentence used to explain everything about me. The accent, the ambition, the tolerance for chaos. It came with a clean, compelling narrative. I crossed an ocean, I reinvented myself, I became someone. I had relocated to California, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, a place of opportunity, reinvention, and overnight billionaires. People nodded when I told that story. It sounded impressive. It made sense. The second time around, I didn't leave a country. I just got in the car. No plan, no destination, no compelling narrative. Just me, my dogs, and whatever else I could fit into my small SUV. The first time I left home, I was running towards something, a future, a vision of myself that looked impressive from the outside, and for a while, it worked. This time, the second time, I didn't know where I was going. I only knew what I was running from. On paper, I had built a life in California, a big career, a house, a marriage, an entire identity that made sense until it didn't. I had learned how to survive 80-hour work weeks, how to accept promotions as proof that I knew what I was doing, that I was successful, how to sit at dinner parties where everyone talked about microdosing and equity while pretending that they weren't quietly miserable or self-medicating. I learned to drive on the right side of the road, and I learned which parts of myself to keep hidden on the left. I learned how to look happy while feeling totally and profoundly empty. I'd been in the US for about 7 years. And right around that time, I took a trip back to Australia. It was Melbourne Cup season. Think like the Kentucky Derby, maybe bigger. The entire country shuts down to watch a horse race. It's famously known as the race that stops the nation. My marriage wasn't doing well, and work had become my entire personality. I was miserable. So I did what any completely reasonable Australian would do. I picked a horse that reminded me of better times, and I bet on it. The horse was called the Cliffs of Moher, a place in Ireland my wife and I had visited right after we got engaged, back when things were still good. I thought of it as a sign. If the horse did well, maybe things would be okay. The horse did not do well. It broke its leg in the middle of the race and had to be euthanized right there on the track. Now, I was prepared for the fact that it probably wouldn't win. I didn't anticipate death. But the truth is, I didn't need a horse race to tell me what I already knew. My American dream was fast becoming a nightmare. A few weeks after I returned to the US, everything collapsed. Not quietly, not gently, and not kindly. My marriage ended abruptly, and not long after, I lost my job. The life I'd built turned out to be completely unsustainable, and staying in California wasn't brave or ambitious anymore. It was delusional and self-destructive, and every part of my being was screaming to get the fuck out. Plus, I started watching Eat, Pray, Love over and over, which is how I knew things were really bad. But at that point, leaving the country again wasn't an option. Enlightenment would have to be found domestically. So I got in the car and I left. Explaining that turned out to be harder than actually doing it. My friends in Australia, they understood it instinctively. We have a word for it, to go walkabout. It's cultural language that's often misused and misunderstood. It doesn't mean to aimlessly wander. It doesn't mean to travel or to take a vacation. It's a spiritual calling. You leave because you are compelled to. You don't really know where you're going. You just go. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's a reckoning. People here, they ask a lot of questions. So what's the plan? How long are you going for? Where will you stay? Will you visit friends? When are you coming back? They wanted milestones and goals. They wanted me to make it sound productive. So I tried. I told people it was a strategic pause, a creative redirection. What I didn't say was that I was struggling to exist, that if I stopped long enough to tell the truth, people would see how much I'd lost, how untethered I felt, how alone I was, how I was barely holding it together. It turns out, going walkabout is a hard thing to explain in a place obsessed with LinkedIn updates and monetizing everything. But I left anyway. I headed south after spending the night at a casino in Tahoe where I'd won big at the craps table, playing the hard ways, which felt weirdly symbolic. When I left California, my next stop was either Phoenix or Tucson. I knew nothing about either, and I wasn't sure how to decide. That is, until I got stuck behind an aggressively slow driver on a single-lane stretch of road. No urgency, no awareness, and nothing more annoying to a girl on her way to a new life for the second time around. I was trapped behind it for an absurd amount of time, and that's when I noticed the badge, Hyundai Tucson. I laughed loudly, and of course I took it as a sign. That's how I chose my next stop, out of spite and traffic. I passed through Tucson. I stayed for a few days, but I was eager to keep moving. I thought the road would give me answers, but instead it gave me experiences. Somewhere between here and Phoenix, I flew an open cockpit biplane restored from World War II, which I did mostly because it sounded like an amazing Instagram post. Until I was in the air and I realized it felt less like a plane and more like a tractor with wings. And then I suddenly remembered I'm afraid of heights. I passed through Sedona and had my aura read by a woman who saw blues and greens. She told me I was in transition and that healing would come. To which I asked, fucking when? I went whitewater rafting in Santa Fe, spray painted my name at Cadillac Ranch, accidentally stumbled into Pride in Austin. I got a tattoo in New Orleans, actually two, and called it a rite of passage. I made it all the way to Florida. I stared at the ocean and I realized I had absolutely no idea what the point was, what the destination should be, what happiness even looked like. Then there was a hurricane. Because of course there was, it's Florida, and Florida sucks. Here's the thing I didn't expect. Nothing fixed me. None of it. There was no moment where the clouds parted and I thought, aha! This was the point. So I turned back. And then somewhere along the way, in the middle of nowhere, I think in Louisiana, I stopped trying to outrun myself. I just sat there. And I remembered the obnoxiously slow Hyundai Tucson in California. I thought of the desert and the most unreal sunset I'd ever witnessed, and I realized something uncomfortable. The problem wasn't that I didn't know where I was going. It was that I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped long enough to stay with myself. Eventually, I drove back to Tucson. Not because it was the destination, but because it was the first place that had called to me. It was the first place where slowing down seemed possible. The first time around, I left Australia to build a life. The second time, I left California because the life I built came crashing down. Physically, I was running away. Emotionally, I was just trying to survive. But more than anything, I wanted to stop abandoning myself. Tucson was the pause I didn't know I needed. The deep breath, the space to feel the grief I'd been lugging across the country like excess baggage. It's the place I needed to finish falling apart before trying to rebuild. I used to believe that movement meant progress, that if I wasn't becoming something, I was failing. Now I know better. Sometimes the power is in unbecoming, in shedding the version of yourself that you built to survive. And for me, the second time around, that looked like a desert, a very long pause, a lot of bloody meditating, and finally staying long enough to see myself clearly again. Thank you.